Behold the man of the hour, the conquering general, returned in triumph. The king whose coffers overflow. He smiles, convinced it's all his own doing. He doesn't know that the loudest sound in the universe is unto blare of his victory trumpets. It's the soft, almost imperceptible groan of a wheel that has already begun its descent. In a world where mortals and gods are locked in an often bloody conversation, there is one concept that strikes fear into the hearts of both. Justice, but not the simple, clean justice of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Not the justice poets sing of and lawmakers chisel into marble. No, this is a justice of a different sort, as ancient as night itself, as relentless as the turning of the stars. A justice whose name is spoken only in hushed tones, with a nervous glance over the shoulder at the shadows. Her name is Nemesis. She is creation's greatest enigma, the living, breathing contradiction to the simple truth that punishment follows only wickedness. The Greeks knew the god's wrath could be kindled by more than just murder or sacrilege. The greatest sin of all, the one guaranteed to draw her ice-cold gaze, is pride, hubris. It's when a mortal, drunk in his own success, starts to think himself an equal of the Olympians. When a general who has won 100 battles smirks in the quiet of his tent, thinking his own genius, not the will of Zeus, brought him victory. When a king, whose granaries are bursting with grain and treasury with gold, looks out over his domain and decides he is the master of his own destiny, and not merely its temporary tenant. In that very moment, his fate is sealed. For Nemesis hears such thoughts. To her they are louder than a battle cry, a jarring note in the grand symphony of the cosmos. But that's not all. Her punishing sword doesn't just fall on the heads of the proud. Sometimes her fury is drawn by excessive, head-spinning good fortune. Picture a merchant whose ships always return from their voyages fully laden, dodging every storm and pirate. His neighbors go bankrupt. Their vessels sink to the bottom of the sea, while he only grows richer. He has done no evil. He works honestly and perhaps even thanks the gods. But his luck becomes an affront, an anomaly. It shatters the equilibrium. The world demands a balance of sorrow and joy, of loss and gain. And when the scales of one man's life tip too far and for too long toward happiness, Nemesis arrives to restore the balance. She is the universe's gardener, ruthlessly pulling the weed of outrageous fortune to give others a chance to grow. She might send a storm to his fleet, burn his warehouses, or take from him the one thing he holds most dear, not out of malice, but from necessity. Like a physician who must cause pain to save the body from a sickness called things are going too well. This is the most terrifying and incomprehensible facet of her power. She punishes not for sin, but for an excess of blessing. For what? For what does she punish the fortunate? For daring to be too happy in a world built for suffering and trials. To understand her nature, one must gaze into the darkness of her birth. Her mother is not the bright Hera or the wise Athena. Her mother is night itself, Nyx, the primordial gloom that existed before the Titans and Olympians, a shapeless, all-consuming void that holds all the world's fears. Nyx spawned a host of grim, inescapable forces that rule the underbelly of existence, and Nemesis is her worthy daughter. Her siblings are Thanatos, Death himself with his black wings and extinguished torch; Eris, the goddess of discord, who tosses her apples of strife between friends and kingdoms; Apate, cunning deceit, whose words are sweeter than honey and deadlier than venom. Raised in a family like that, suckled on the cold breath of the cosmos, Nemesis could be no other way. She knows nothing of pity, compassion, or forgiveness. Such concepts do not exist in her vocabulary. There is only one thing, measure, and woe betide any who overstep it. Her appearance is a mirror of her essence. Artists and poets depict her as a stern maiden with a severe, focused face. She is not angry, not gloating. Her gaze is cold and detached, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Behind her back, she often has wings not angelic, but swift and predatory, like a falcon's or a griffin's, a symbol that she will hunt down her victim anywhere, be it a king's palace or a pauper's hovel. In one hand, she holds a punishing sword or dagger, short, practical, made for a single, precise strike. But far more important is her attribute, the wheel, the great wheel of fortune, which she turns slowly, and today you are on top, a ruler, a hero, fortune's favorite. But the wheel will turn. Creaking and groaning, it will drag you down into the mud, into oblivion, into nothingness, while at the same time raising up someone who, only yesterday, was a nobody. Sometimes she is shown with a bridle to rein in the proud, or with her elbow bent at a right angle, a cubit, an ancient symbol of measure and precision. She measures out your luck, your glory, your happiness, and when your limit is reached, she comes to collect the debt. She is not evil, she is order. The cruel, impersonal, fundamental order that keeps the universe from collapsing into chaos from the unbearable pride and unearned happiness of its inhabitants. It was this very impersonal order that became the first casualty of time itself. The ancient poet Hesiod observed the world around him, bitterly concluded that humanity was sliding into an abyss. He divided its history into 5 ages, each worse than the last. And in the worst of these ages, men became so depraved that even the gods abandoned them. For it was in this dark time, as the scales of the entire world tipped toward evil and lawlessness, that the work of Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance, became more vital than ever. But even her power was not limitless. And so Nemesis, the child of night, for the first time in her existence, felt weary. And one day she veiled her face and departed the earth, ascending back into the ice-cold void of space, leaving mankind alone with its own dishonor. It was the greatest tragedy of all. For with her departure, the punishment for pride vanished and mankind was left with no hope of justice, no matter how cruel, even existing. The first lesson was this. It was about a youth named Narcissus, who was so beautiful that the world outside of him faded away. His grace was like a statue brought to life, an ethereal presence that was both near and impossibly far. He moved as if in a waking dream, unaware of the quiet adoration that followed him. A curse had taken her voice, leaving her only with the ability to repeat the sound she heard. Her silent devotion to Narcissus was her only language. She would follow him at a distance, content just to be near his solitary light. One afternoon, feeling a pang of loneliness, he sent out a soft call into the trees, a question seeking companionship. Mistaking the echo of his own voice for a reply, she stepped forward from her hiding place, her expression full of hopeful tenderness. But Narcissus, seeing her reach for him, was only puzzled. He did not understand her hopeful gesture and gently withdrew, seeking to return to the quiet solitude he knew. With her unspoken feelings held within, her form slowly dissolved like morning mist until nothing was left but her plaintive voice, forever bound to wander the lonely places of the earth. But she was not alone. One of the young men he had spurned, watching Narcissus walk away, raised his hands to the heavens and uttered not a curse, but a plea, terrifying in its simplicity. Let him, too, love as we have loved, and let his love be just as hopeless. This prayer was not meant for Zeus or Apollo. It was meant for the ears of the one who hears such requests, and Nemesis heard. She didn't hurl a lightning bolt, she didn't send a monster. She simply arranged for the thirst-plagued Narcissus to stumble upon her perfectly still, clear for a spring, where the water was as motionless as a mirror. Leaning down to drink, he froze. From the water's surface, the most beautiful creature he had ever seen gazed back at him. He fell in love instantly, madly, irrevocably. He had fallen in love with his own reflection. For hours, days, weeks, he sat by the spring, trying to embrace the elusive image, whispering to it the words of love he had never spoken to a living soul, and receiving in reply only the silent movement of lips. For the first time in his life, he knew the torment of unrequited passion, the very feeling to which he had condemned dozens of others. Nemesis gave him exactly what the spurned lover had prayed for. She turned his greatest asset, his beauty and self-obsession, into the very instrument of his transformation. Absorbed in this contemplation, he lost his connection to the world, and his life force slowly faded away until, on the very spot where he sat, a beautiful and cold flower grew, which still bears his name. She spoke too late. The age of iron had thoroughly corrupted humanity. Its greatest sin was no longer that it forgot the gods. It was that it never knew them. But back then, long before the deluge of forgetfulness, in the days when men still looked up in awe at the heavens and whispered prayers to beings they had never seen, there lived a people whose piety was as legendary as their hubris. Their deeds are sung by the poets, their folly lamented by the seers, for in those days, the gods walked among men, or rather rode among them on chariots drawn by hippocampi, snorting steeds of the sea. They competed in chariot races that shook the earth and split the sky. They hurled thunderbolts that made mountains crumble and worshipped in temples that touched the clouds. They sang hymns to Dionysus, danced at his frenzied festivals, and even, it is said, composed tragedies that moved the immortal gods themselves to tears. That last feat was accomplished by none other than King Midas, his ears glowing like a furnace with divine inspiration. But while the king basked in the afterglow of his accomplishment, his mind, forever grasping at more and more, hatched yet another scheme. While the Olympians were busy with their games, he would drive his chariot across the heavens and join them on Olympus. No mortal had ever dared such blasphemy, but the thought thrilled him, and he made preparations for his ascension. Day was set. All of Phrygia turned out to watch as Midas and his entourage ascended the sacred Mount Cyprus, each step bringing them closer to the celestial plains. There, on the very peak, he would mount his chariot and ascend to Olympus, or so he planned. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. From afar, the god of the winds noticed the procession climbing the mountain and took it into his head to have some fun. As Midas neared the summit, the wind suddenly shifted, sending a biting chill down the mountainside. King Midas shivered and stumbled. Still, he pushed on, thinking only the summit could save him from the sudden cold. But once there, disaster struck. With a roar of laughter, Pan blew a mighty blast, snatching the king's hat right off his head and sending it plummeting down the mountain. It tumbled and rolled until it disappeared from sight, And soon after, Pan let loose another gust that sent the king's reins flying into the abyss. The poor horses reared and scattered, plunging the king's ascension attempt into chaos. By the time Midas reached the peak, both his hat and reins were gone, along with any hope of reaching Olympus. The other courtiers fared even worse. Some tumbled over cliffs, others froze solid in the sudden blizzard. In the end, only Midas stood atop the mountain, shivering, furious, and utterly alone. Seeing that all hope of Olympus was dashed, he turned around and descended the mountain, cursing the gods for their cruel joke. In truth, it wasn't a joke, it was retribution. The god of the wild had reclaimed his domain. The king's hubris had reached the heavens, but his punishment would stay firmly on the ground. Soon after, Midas was tending his vineyard, cursing the gods, when a band of Silenoi found him and dragged him deep into the forest. There amid the trees, they roasted goat legs over an open fire, sang raucous songs and feasted till dawn. Then they approached Midas and offered him a choice. If he agreed to become one of them, shedding his mortality and joining their immortal revelry, they would swear to protect his realm forever. And so the king of Phrygia, exhorted and alone, accepted their offer and joined the cult of Dionysus, forever forsaking the plains of Olympus for the carefree joy of the wilderness. They say that Nemesis was the last of the gods to leave the world. At least, that's how Hesiod tells it in his lost poem, the Katasterismoi, or the placing of the constellations. According to him, it happened gradually. At first, men were unfazed by Nemesis's quiet rebuke, but as the ages went by, her voice grew ever quieter. Men learned to drown it out with the jingle of coin, the clash of arms, and loud, boastful laughter. The blush of shame was replaced by a defiant, insolent stare, the pangs of conscience by cold calculation. And one day, standing on a scorched mountainside and gazing down at cities where brothers sold brother and rulers feasted during famines, Idaeus, quiet and mournful, for the first time veiled her face with a thin, almost transparent shroud. She could no longer bear to look. Her work here was done, and Nemesis, her eternal and stern sister in spirit, understood without a word. She saw that the final inner bastion had fallen. Any retribution she dealt now would be as meaningless as striking water with a sword. And so, in a great silence, broken only by the groans of the earth, the last two divine forces that upheld order made their decision. They left this world together. Conscience departed, and in her wake, so did justice. This was not an apocalypse of fire and brimstone. It was something far worse. It was the concealment of a fundamental truth. The great cosmic law that every action has an inescapable consequence was hidden from humanity. With the departure of Nemesis, the fear of divine judgment vanished. The very certainty that the universe was watching you was gone. The compass that pointed to a moral north was shattered. Now a tyrant could die in his bed, surrounded by luxury, never paying for the rivers of blood he had spilled. A fraud could live to a ripe old age, enjoying his stolen wealth, with no one to curse him with an eternal hunger. The world plunged, not just into evil, but into something more terrifying, a moral vacuum. The disappearance of Nemesis became her final, cruelest lesson. The greatest punishment for humanity is to be left alone with itself, without fear and without hope of a higher justice. Humans were left alone in a world where the only measures of anything were brute force and cunning. The great wheel ground to a halt. Those at the top were given the chance to stay there forever. Those at the bottom were robbed of even the ghostly hope that justice would one day prevail. It was the true triumph of chaos. It was achieved not by invasion, but by departure. Centuries passed. The names of the gods became legends, their temples picturesque ruins. Humanity built new laws, new ethical systems, trying to fill the void left by Nemesis night. But the secret of her legacy never vanished. It simply went underground, hiding itself in the very fabric of our culture, in the deep archetypes we absorb with our mother's milk. The myths of Narcissus and Narcissus stopped being divine case files and became what we call fairy tales or fables. But the ice-cold warning lives on. Every time we read a tragedy about a king undone by his own pride, every time we watch a film about a billionaire who, in his lust for power, loses everything he loves, every time we utter a proverb like "what goes around comes around," or "the bigger they are, the harder they fall," we, without knowing it, are quoting the laws of Nemesis. Her image has dissolved, but her principle, the principle of cosmic balance, has proven immortal. It lives in our literature, in our history, in the quiet, gut-level knowledge that excessive fortune is unsettling and that boundless pride is repulsive. Her ghost stands behind the shoulder of every dictator, every upstart, every person who decides they are the master of their own fate. We have forgotten her name, but her shadow still falls upon our world. And this brings us to the final, most unsettling question. If Nemesis truly left, then who, or what, turns her wheel today? In our rational, technological world, stripped of ancient gods, what performs her function? Is it the impersonal laws of economics, which crush the mightiest corporations when they become too greedy and or the inexorable march of history, which sooner or later sweeps away every tyranny? Could it be that nature itself has taken her role, responding to our hubris and consumerism with climate catastrophes that spare neither rich nor poor? Or is our legacy now public opinion, capable of raising a person to the pinnacle of fame overnight, and just as easily casting them into the abyss of oblivion for a single misstep? Or perhaps there is nothing at all. Perhaps the wheel is truly broken, the universe blind and deaf, and the few instances where justice seems to prevail are mere accidents. Coincidence is an illusion we cling to desperately to keep from going mad at the realization that we are all alone in a cold and indifferent cosmos. Is there still a power that measures our fortune and punishes our hubris? Look at the world around you. The answer to that question may be the greatest mystery of our own Iron Age. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a comment to support the series. You can also listen to or watch the podcast and video versions of these episodes, as well as become a patron of the show. Thank you for listening.